And we are thrilled to have a gubernatorial candidate, Ned Lamont, here with us this morning. Some other noteworthy people in the room, President John Clark, Dean Michelle Brown, School of Arts and Sciences, and Dr. Howell Williams, who organized this event for us. I'd just like to say a couple words before we get started. The first is how important this is to our core values as a university. I don't know if you pay attention, but I do a lot. I look at our mission, our value statements, and there are two very important values that this event represents. The first is dialogue. We value the conversations that explore diverse perspectives and encourage shared understanding. And the second is respect. We value the right of all people to be treated with dignity and fairness and expect this in our policies, classrooms, and community. And I anticipate that these values will be evident in this discussion today. So I want to thank you all for participating in that and upholding those goals of Western. I also am obligated to note, and happy to do so, that the use of WCSU facilities for this event does not constitute an endorsement by WCSU or Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. Neither the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities or WCSU endorses any candidate or ballot measure in this or any other election. That is not our role. Our role is to host dialogue. Per our Board of Regents policies, all legally qualified candidates running for governor have been invited, and those who have accepted have been scheduled to speak here. So I hope you watch for announcements of other events. And now to the candidate. Ned Lamont is the Democratic Party nominee for Connecticut governor. He has spent much of his career in the private sector, having founded and run a telecommunications company. As a public servant, Lamont has served on the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Estimation and Taxation in Greenwich. He also served as chairman of the State Investment Advisory Council, where he oversaw the state's pension fund. Ned Lamont ran for U.S. Senate in 2006 and beat Democrat Joe Lieberman in the primary, but he lost in the general election that year. In the years since, then Lamont has been active in politics, chairing the Obama campaign in Connecticut and serving on the boards of humanitarian and clean energy organizations. Please give a warm welcome to Ned Lamont. And I will turn this over to Howell Williams of Political Science, who will lead the conversation today. Thank you.
The first question that I have is, what do you think the three biggest issues facing Connecticut today are?
Can I pivot into that?
Please.
Let me just say how pleased I am to be back here, and tell you something else, that when I graduated from college way back in the 1970s, we had a commencement speaker that stood up and said, go back, unpack, there are no jobs for you, get your parents to pay for another year of tuition, we don't know what to do with you. Well, I can tell you that whatever you hear coming out of Hartford, whatever you hear coming out of Washington, D.C., this is an amazing time to be at Western, an amazing time to be graduating, and an amazing time to be staying here in the state of Connecticut. In my lifetime, I've never seen a point where we are today where we have tens of thousands of really good jobs that we're having a hard time filling because we're not training the people for these jobs. So, question number one, what would be a priority? I would say make sure we train people for the jobs we have here in the state of Connecticut, and make sure these are Connecticut jobs for Connecticut families. And it's across the board. It's in advanced manufacturing. That's maybe other part of the state, but Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, Electric Boat, Stanley Black & Decker, really desperate for folks with those type of skills. It's in the trades, because all the folks who build things in this state are retiring out. And we're going to need tens of thousands of new folks who have the skills to build. And these are also good paying jobs. I know you have an amazing nursing program here at Western, and we have a real shortage of nurses and teachers going forward. So think about where you want to be. My job is to make sure, working with Western and working with our community colleges and working with our education system, that we are training people for these jobs. Second question, answer your question. When GE left the state, they said, A, we can't find the next generation of smart tech-enabled millennials who want to be here. And B, even if we could find them, they can't get to the office because the transportation system is in gridlock. They're over in Fairfield, Connecticut, and they were stuck on I-95, and it was bumper-to-bumper traffic. And that's sort of shame on us as a state, because we have failed to invest in education, we have failed to invest in transportation, and we've got to do a better job of investing in each and every one of you and making sure this is a state that you can call home. So those would be my two biggest priorities. The third one is get our fiscal house in order. As you maybe know, going back the last 10, 20 years, governors on both sides of the aisle have shortchanged the state, not made the investments, not put money into the pension fund, and the bill is coming due. And I will say, I know you focus a little bit more on state and local government, and it's really where my heart is. And I hope I can convince some of you to think about coming to Hartford and staying involved. Everybody says, I want to go down to Washington, that's where all the action is, and the Washington Post, and but you can make an enormous difference getting active in your local community and getting active in your state government, and we're going to be looking for some good folks starting in January.
Good, thank you. As you mentioned, a lot of the students in this class are taking a state and local government class. So what specifically can the governor do to address some of the issues that you've raised?
Everything. That's what a governor does. Our problem is that our governors have been a little absent when it comes to taking the hard decisions. No fault of this current governor, but he wasn't even invited into the legislative deliberations when it came to what we have to do about our budget this last time. And if you leave it just to the legislature, they can ratchet up a rate here, or they can do a little line item here, but it's a governor who takes the lead in terms of the big reforms we got to do to get this state going again. How we save money on health care, how we save our pensions to make sure the pensions are there for all your professors here at Western when they retire out. Ways that we can start growing this economy. This is a state that hasn't added any net new jobs in 30 years. We're flat as a pancake. And the main thing I got to do is convince each and every one of you this is a state where you want to stay, because you're much in demand. Is that for you? Oh, keep going. We all sound the same.
Okay, great. And then you touched on this in your response to the first question. How can young people become more involved in the political process?
You can volunteer for a campaign, volunteer for Ken Gucker's campaign for state representative. He's standing right here in the back of the auditorium. You can come on up to New Haven, where we've got our main offices. We've got an office here in Danbury as well. And there's no better advocate for a campaign than a young person. Everybody wants to know why you're involved, what you care about, why you came on board with that campaign, be it a Republican or a Democrat. I would urge you, you can make such an amazing difference. And then more importantly, it gets you in the front door if you have any interest in coming up to a place like Hartford and reforming how we do our transportation system, reforming how we do health care, making sure that our Department of Social Services is there, taking care of the folks most in need. Maybe somebody smart can figure out what to do with our Department of Motor Vehicles. That place is a disaster. You go in there a Democrat, you leave a Republican. Everybody's lined up and going, if they can't get this right, how can they get anything right? So somebody with some IT skills, some entrepreneurial zip and get up and go, who can take on a challenge like that, we want you.
Okay, thank you. This is an event for our community as well, so I think we'd like to hear some questions from the audience.
Okay, I'm going to start this off here. Since you're really interested in transportation, I've been trying to get people to think backwards and outside the box for years. What I've noticed is that we have way too many people working at 9 o'clock in the morning and not at 9 o'clock at night. So why not offer businesses tax breaks for people who time shift work? Get them off the roads in the morning. 12 to 8, base it on second, third shift, weekends, holidays. Get people to stop working at 9 o'clock in the morning. Do we have to have it, all our jobs at 9 o'clock in the morning? Why can't we just think outside the box? And that should eliminate thousands of cars off the roads. And
I hear you. No, everybody heard that question. We have a choke point, and at rush hour, that's when you can't move. And real estate brokers on I-95 will not even show people a building during rush hour because they'd see how impossible it is to get back and forth. The gentleman.
So tax breaks, take reverse tax breaks. Give businesses. It's called prime time pricing.
Thank you.
We as DJs, you can't get a discount in June, but in January you can. So think like that, and we can solve the problems.
Make it easier for people to have flex time, easier for people to go during off time. I'll give you one very specific thing that I have recommended, and I've taken a little bit of heat for it, but I love your point of view. Tractor-trailer trucks create about 90% of the destruction of our roads and highways. Tractor-trailer trucks are often congesting our roads and highways at prime time. I've talked about putting some electronic tolling just on the big tractor-trailer trucks coming in and out of this state. And one of the things I would do is I would offer you a significant discount if you weren't on our roads and bridges at prime time, if you did more of your transportation during the off hours. That's a way that A, we can raise a little bit more revenue so we can fix our roads and bridges. B, that's how we get some of those trucks off the road right when you're trying to get to work.
Hi. So you were talking about saving money in our state and readjusting the budget to improve our state in general. How do you intend on doing that without cutting social welfare programs?
That's a very, the question is how can we save money without hitting the most vulnerable in our society and the social welfare programs. And our last budget was a disaster. It was bipartisan. They all got together, and they mainly hit the most vulnerable in social welfare programs and made people ineligible for Medicaid, and people went without health insurance. And it jacked up the price in health insurance for the people most need it, or congested our emergency rooms. I say that to the folks here, especially interested in the nursing program. And it's the exact wrong thing to do. You can save money, though, in the three big buckets that I tried to describe earlier. Number one is our state employee health care plan. I think there are ways that we can drive down the price of pharmaceuticals. There are ways that we can incent you to go to a lower cost, a better performing option and save money there. I think there are ways that we can do things in terms of shared services. I love this state. I've been to all 169 towns. That's what you do when you're running for governor. You better go to those 169 towns. And if you haven't been to Basra in a week, they'll say, how come you haven't been to Basra? So I go there, and I love the feisty independence of our 169 towns. But that doesn't mean we need 169 tax collectors or 150 superintendents and deputy superintendents or police chiefs or things like that. And there are ways that we can share some of those back office services that would make an enormous difference. And for those of you in teaching, I would say because we have so many independent school districts, we're one of the very few states in the country that have more administrators outside the classroom than teachers in the classroom. So yeah, there are some ways that we can save money, improve the quality of service, and I've got to do that in the near term, because right now, I got to tell you, the taxpayers are a little teed off. They just don't think Connecticut has a clue how to spend their money. And one of the things I like to do is show them Western and show them how their dollars are being well invested and what this means to education and our future.
Thank you, sir, for coming. Can you talk a little bit about where you plan to put the money towards veterans, preferably the Veterans Hospital and homeless veterans in Connecticut?
the first thing I got to do is keep our promise to people. I'm running against somebody that says they will eliminate over half the state budget over the near term. And what that would mean in terms of, college, what that would mean in terms of tuition, what that would mean in terms of the most vulnerable in our society is absolutely wrong and irresponsible. And what that would mean in terms of our veterans. This last year, they tried to cut out the honor guard, which provides, taps when a veteran passes away. And I know what they're doing. We got to save some money, and it's a lineup, but it's the wrong way to go. Secondly, what I tell you about veterans is we're going to maintain, free tuition for our veterans. Something we've done and something we're not going to cut back on. Look, the service they provided for us, we're going to make sure that we do what we owe them going forward. And I'd be the first governor in a long time that started a business, and hiring a veteran is as strong and positive a credential as I can think of when I'm looking for somebody. Not just the skill set and the sense of service and the values that they represent. And I'm going to make sure we do everything we can to make sure veterans get that leg on the ladder of success.
So kind of going off of what they were saying about social welfare policies and programs and veterans, what do you want to do for the people in Connecticut that are suffering from mental illnesses and resources and things like that to help those types of people?
Well, keep faith, first of all. Right now, it's those not-for-profits that are there taking care of folks with mental disabilities that are the first ones cut in a budget because it's called discretionary spending. Over here are things called fixed costs that you can't talk, and the not-for-profits that provide service for people with mental disabilities and addiction services and the such are the first things cut. But I'll tell you something else. I mean, when I talk about this, I have to talk about it as the sense that it's not just the right thing to do, and that's who we are as a state, but it's also a smart thing to do, because if we are not able to provide for these people, then their caregiver, their spouse, their mother, their father, they can't afford to go out and work. And all of a sudden, you have a cycle that's going in the wrong direction. So these are services that are just the right thing to do, and also the right way to get our economy going and growing again. And that's why I have to convince the taxpayers every day that that investment is well made, not just for that person in need, but also for our greater economy and greater good.
Thank you for coming. One thing I noticed early on in your campaign was a commercial of you standing in front of the New Haven Planned Parenthood. How, or at least I believe it was the New Haven one, how do you plan on protecting Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights and autonomy, especially given the fact that our current vice president has a little bit of a beef with our current governor?
Who's that? Our current vice president? Who's that? Pence? So there were a lot of noise coming out of Washington, D.C., but there are also some policies that are very destructive to everything I think we stand for as a state. And you mentioned Planned Parenthood and the fact that people's reproductive rights could be put at jeopardy if Kavanaugh is the deciding vote on the Supreme Court. A lot of those decisions get taken back to the state. The Republican candidate for lieutenant governor has been very outspoken in terms of cutting back on people's reproductive rights and freedoms. So a governor can make a big difference there. I mean, I think you know where I'll stand, that we're going to be a firewall and make sure that when it comes to the environment, when it comes to ghost guns and bum stocks, when it comes to making sure that maternity care and contraception and women's right to choose are included in Obamacare and protected in our Constitution, this is a place where a governor, in association with the legislature, can make a big difference. And it's one of the real differences between, us and the other guys who are running, and I think you know where I'm going to stand on those issues. And that's why I probably had that photograph taken when I did there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming. In a climate where a lot of states have eliminated collective bargaining with employees, I guess I just want to get your perspective in terms of collective bargaining as it relates to the state of Connecticut and how you plan to work with the unions and the collective organizations.
No, good question. It follows on that last question. You got the Janus decision that came out of the Supreme Court and which jeopardizes people's right to organize within the private sector. You got folks saying, I don't want the trades and others to be able to organize. And I'll tell you a couple things. Our middle class is getting hit and hit hard. I think the right to organize is one of the protections we have as a bulwark to protect our middle class. When it comes to our state employees and our teachers and the such, I support collective bargaining. And I'll say two things about that. Collective bargaining means you have a place at the table. It's a sign of respect. It means not that we don't negotiate. It doesn't mean we don't bargain. It doesn't mean we sometimes roll up our sleeves, but it means working families and the middle class have a place at the table. And I will fight every day to make sure that you have a place at the table. And that's the type of bill that's coming out of Washington, D.C., where, again, a governor can make a difference. I'll just say one other thing. When it comes to immigration, I mean, what a sea change. I know there's been, a lot in Danbury when it comes to immigration and legal immigration and dreamers and folks who are here. I think you want a governor who really celebrates our diversity, celebrates the folks that, came to this country, celebrates the fact that, the dreamers came here at a very young age. We want to make sure that they can get a great education at Western. We want to make sure that they can get a scholarship. We want to make sure they can go on and become great productive members of the Connecticut community. These are the type of issues where a governor can make a difference. Thank you for your question.
Hi, thanks for coming. I wanted to know your stance on paid maternity leave and what your plans are to help families that need that time off right after having newborn babies.
The question is about paid maternity leave. And here, I have a real disagreement with the other candidates. I support paid maternity leave. Again, like your question, it's the right thing to do. Half the folks working in Hartford, I don't know about Danbury, are single parents. And if you make her choose between taking care of her newborn and having to work, taking care of somebody sick, paid family medical leave, or having to work, that's a bad choice. It's unfair to her. We want that person to be able to work. And more broadly, I go to the business community that says, oh no, this is just another mandate and it's bad for business. No, you know what's bad for business in this day and age? If a really smart, productive person who's working in your team no longer can be able to keep working because she just had a baby. And you're not going to give her a little time to take care of that child. And then you lose that person. Let me tell you what that does to your workforce. So I can make that argument from both sides. But it's something we're going to get passed. I don't know why Connecticut's slow on this. Massachusetts just passed it. New York's passing it. And I want to make sure that Connecticut has a workplace that welcomes the next generation of workers. And paid family and medical leave is a big piece of that.
So the California governor last year signed the Sanctuary State Bill, which limits how state and local law enforcement agencies can comply with federal immigration authorities. Since you mentioned your stance on the Dreamers and immigration, I was wondering how you were working to make Connecticut a more progressive and a sanctuary state eventually to protect those.
Certainly a more progressive state, certainly a more welcoming state, certainly a state that tells each and every one of the folks, whatever your background, race, color, or creed, we welcome you here. The number of people that have come up to me and said, I don't think Donald Trump respects people like me. What type of a signal does that send? That is so destructive and so un-American. You know, specific to your question about, you know, city police and are they enforcing ICE laws? Are they enforcing Danbury laws? Their number one priority is to keep our streets safe and work well with the community going forward. You know, ICE can handle what they've got to do. I hope all of our mayors, even here in Danbury, prioritize that our local police focus on keeping the streets safe and let ICE do their stuff elsewhere. You know, they're sometimes they're going to the courthouse, they're going to social service, they're trying to entrap and catch people in many places. And that's not what we're all about. I'm not going to let that happen.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my question is based on the gun violence. As you know that we've had, you know, that in the past happening here. What is your plan on protecting the people what is your plan like on protecting the people? I mean, because I believe that a lot of people are living in fear, like in schools, you know, stores, whatever. So what is your stand on gun violence?
Gun violence. A few weeks ago, I was back up in Newtown in Sandy Hook, where they had that horrific massacre. And 6 years ago, and the kids from Parkland High School in Florida came up. And they're, the Sandy Hook kids and the Parkland kids are close to the same age. One was at a high school, one was at an elementary school. And it was just amazing hearing them tell their story, what that meant to a community like Newtown 6 years later. And a little credit to Dan Malloy, who doesn't get much credit. He was our governor. He stood up. He put in place, you know, some strict gun safety laws. And I'm not looking for a lot of new laws, but I'm looking for strict enforcement of the laws that we have. And let me give you an example, just to be clear. Let's say, which is a fact, that automatic weapons are not allowed. They're outlawed in a state like this. I'm not taking away anybody's weapons, but automatic weapons are against the law. Right now, over the internet, you can buy an automatic weapon and it comes delivered to you with no background check. It's called a ghost gun. And if it's delivered in 6 different pieces, it somehow runs these laws. So I want to make sure our laws are brought into the 21st century. We strictly enforce them. We work closely with our schools and high schools. We make sure that we have social service folks in our schools and high schools so people can recognize things that could be at risk. I think the idea of arming all of our teachers is one of the craziest things I've ever heard. It's wrong. So again, this is one of those issues that there's a big difference between me and my opponent in this race for governor. I think you know where I stand.
Two more questions.
Can we talk about pensions?
How about Ken Gucker? Do you have a question? Oh, okay.
Living in a border town and traveling over the border once a day, you said you were just going to toll trucks. Is that legal? Just trucks? And if it is, what will you do to protect Connecticut residents from being tolled? Because eventually, once the gantries are there, it's just a software issue.
Rhode Island, for the last 4 or 5 months, has electronic tolling just on trucks. Truckers don't like it. I got to be blunt about that. So we'll see how that sorts out over the next 3, 4, 5 months in terms of that. Secondly, Massachusetts does it, and they offer deep discounts to Massachusetts residents based on frequency. You know, here in Danbury, you're right on a border. You go across, you're paying tolls in New York. I got to be very strict with people, though. You know, I've said I am focused just on the tractor-trailer trucks. It generates about $100 million. We can't borrow our way. We can't raise gasoline taxes anymore. That's a lousy way for us to build and upgrade our transportation system, which is so important, including rail here in Danbury. And that my 100% focus is just on those tractor-trailer trucks. And we're going to know from the Rhode Island example very soon how that sorts out.
talk about pensions?
Let's hear from someone who hasn't gotten a chance to ask a question. Yeah.
We'll do both.
Okay.
Hi. You mentioned earlier about opportunities for young people volunteering. I just wanted to know your thoughts on why, like incentives for young people volunteering, because just as a young person in college, it seems very much like an old boys club, and it just seems like the game isn't made for us. So how would you engage young people?
Let's do, can we do all three to finish up?
Yeah.
Ken, did you have one last thing?
And
That guy in the back?
Yeah.
Did you want me to answer that question?
No, did you have a question?
Here in Danbury, we have a mayor who, thank God, did not make it through the Republican primary, who has a problem with the homeless issue here in Danbury and is trying to close doors to today's shelter. A lot of the homeless problem that you witness on downtown Danbury has to do with people with mental and psychological issues. That being said, how do we expand and take care of those people, one, and two, maybe open up more shelters like is happening in Danbury that, Danbury, Mark found out after 35 years, oh wow, I don't want that there, it shouldn't be there. How do we protect them from going backwards in their good work?
Right, let me take those in order. Just first of all, this gentleman's question is about the pensions. Let me just tell you about, this is a real concern and real top of mind for each and every one of you, because right now our state pays about 30% of our budget paying for spending that took place over the last generation or two. And that's unfair to your generation because 30% of your taxes are going to pay for stuff that my generation spent. A lot of that is in pensions, teacher and state employee pensions. And as I said before, don't blame the teachers. Don't blame that teacher who worked her heart out for 40 years and now she's 70 years of age. And sorry, they didn't put any money in the pension for you. And let me just finish. And they don't even have Social Security. So I've got to negotiate in good faith with these people going forward, make sure I can do a better job of putting assets in the pension so the money's going to be there, and I can slow the rate of increase in the out years so that rather than the liabilities going up faster than the assets, we go the other direction. In terms of volunteers and the Old Boys Network, come on over to my office. You'll find that's no Old Boys Network. But I hate hearing about the Old Boys Network, because if somebody as smart and talented as you feels like you're not welcome in an environment, whether it's a not-for-profit, whether it's a campaign, whether it's something you start up, and I urge you to start up. I mean, a lot of these older not-for-profits are as ossified, calcified as, some of the things in state government. They can use a lot of new energy, and those are the places I like to be. But we are desperate to make sure that folks stay involved in their community and with their not-for-profits in the state, because we're losing some of that as our communities. You see what's happening to volunteer firehouses and the such. Talk about an Old Boys Network. And we need that sense of participation and volunteerism. It really is what makes a community sing, and it's part of why we're on this earth. It's about service and doing things for other than yourself. And to Ken Gucker's comment, it follows on folks with mental disabilities and the homeless shelters. I want to do everything I can, Ken, first and foremost, to make it easier for people to stay in their homes. I want to do everything I can in terms of reducing the property tax so it's more affordable for people to stay in their home. I want to do everything I can in terms of making sure that Medicaid doesn't just pay for you in the nursing home, but also can provide an aid that comes to your home and allows you to stay in your home. That's a non-direct way of answering your question, but I think it's the best therapy, the best place for folks in need like that, and it also saves the state a fortune. Somebody at their own home is 1/5 as expensive as paying for somebody in that nursing home. And those are the type of changes that I really want to make going forward. But I think we're wrapping up here. I love the nature of your questions, because I thought we were going to be talking about just how we get you better job opportunities in the state, and and turn this state around. But you're also asking a lot of questions about other people. And you're asking a lot of questions about homeless and gun violence and folks with mental disabilities and thinking more broadly, because people sometimes don't know what government does. And we are the front line there when it comes to making sure at the end of the day that our most vulnerable are taken care of. And I don't get those questions enough, so I like Western. Thanks.
Okay, thank you again for joining us. Just as a reminder to students who are here because of their courses, there are sign-in sheets in the back of the room. Thank you all for coming, and again, thank you to Ned Lamont for joining us.
Oh, thanks. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for coming.